Entrepreneur MBA podcast purpose is to help existing business owners grow their companies past the 10 million in revenue per year benchmark. Here is your host, Stephen Halasnik.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Stephen Halasnik, and I'm co-founder of Financing Solutions. Financing Solutions provides easy to set up lines of credit for small businesses. Yes, there's a company who specifically does that for small businesses. Over my 25 plus years of career of building companies, I've almost always had a line of credit. I just really believe in it. It's nice to run a company now that I'm passionate about the whole idea of having a line of credit, and that's what we do. If you're interested in learning more, please visit our website at fscreditline.com. That's FS as in Financing Solutions, creditline.com. So over the last 25 years, it's really 30 years, but after 25, you don't say it anymore. I've built 6 companies in the $5 million to $25 million range, including 2 companies that have made the Inc. 500 fastest growing companies in the United States. I love learning from people with business experience. And today I'm very excited to be speaking with Marquis Murray from his own company. But before we get to Marquis, in today's digital business environment, cybersecurity protection is no longer a nice to have. And that's why Technology Management Group, or TMG, has become very big in our industry of helping people with cybersecurity concerns. They've been around for 30 years. And, if you haven't had any cybersecurity issues, you consider yourself lucky. And once you've had one, you really start to pay much more attention to it. So if you're interested, if you have a question, if you're worried about something, please take a look at them. You can reach them at cyberctrl.net. Again, it's cyberctrl.net. Our guest today is Marquis Murray. He's a business process consultant and an expert in improving systems and optimizing processes. He helps teams make the most of their technology by standardizing their operating systems and streamlining their processes. He has over 15 years of experience in the industry. He's well-versed in growing and leading successful teams. In fact, his consultancy, Ditto, was acquired after only 2 years in the business. Prior to Ditto, he also founded an inbound marketing agency, which he later successfully exited. Marquis, welcome to today's Entrepreneur MBA podcast.
Thanks so much, Stephen. It's great to be here.
So, we're going to be talking about something which I've been preaching on over the 400 plus episodes I've done about how critical it is for small businesses to build processes. When you are working with your clients, typically, why do they bring you on board?
Yeah, it's a great question. And typically the issues are that they don't have standards around how their teams work, right? And we can, fishtail off into different ways of thinking about that. But they don't have the visibility they need from a reporting standpoint. They don't have the data they need to make, informed decisions. Their teams are working in different ways, whether it's they're using different software tools or each team or department has their own way of doing things, and they want to create those standards. Typically, they're running up against deadlines and timelines, and their teams just simply aren't in sync. And so they really want to bring everyone together, standardize their processes, and create clarity really around how they work and how their teams and projects should be aligned.
Well, what's the business problem they typically come to you with in layman's term? They'll call you up and they'll say, Marquis, blah, 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 blah. What is that blah, 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 blah?
Yeah, it's typically our processes are a mess. Someone was on our team years ago and they created these systems and now they're not with our company anymore and we need to figure out how the work gets done. Burnout often comes up where their teams are overburdened, overworked, and they can't figure out who's spending time on what. Oftentimes I'll hear, we don't know what we don't know. We're just scratching the surface on our tools as well, and we need to create standards around how we work so that everyone can simply get on the same page. So I hear quite a bit, but typically the problems are we don't have the visibility that we need. We don't have consistency within our team. We don't have documentation to follow. Our onboarding is a mess. When people come on our teams, they don't know what they're doing, and they're learning the bad practices from the people that have been here for years, and they're just figuring it out as they go.
Is there a certain industry that you find that you work in the most?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's typically B2B or B2C e-commerce brands that we're doing a lot of work with. We'll typically work with marketing agencies and marketing departments as well, who are delivering products and services. And so if it's a marketing team, there are campaigns that they are working through. There are product launches that they're working through as well. And they need to create standards around how they deliver. If they are, a marketing agency, typically it is, client onboarding where they're getting stuck in, and then keeping up with their team internal onboarding and their training as well. But as far as specific industries, we don't typically work with any specific industries, but it's the marketing teams within these larger organizations that we are connecting with quite often.
So, I mean, I've learned from personal experience, building processes is one thing.
Yeah.
But do you then consult with your clients to make sure that they're using them? Because, once it gets onto paper, you get it
Yeah.
onto paper and then it gets forgotten, right? So, what do
Yeah.
you advise your clients to do to make sure that the processes are being followed?
That's the tough part. And like one of our services is monthly support. So we continue and we jump back in if there's any new training or iterations to processes that are needed. But the way that we work is we will work with them in workshops to develop the processes with them. So we're figuring out, how they work right now, what the current state looks like, what the current pain points are, what their ideals for what the future state should look like. And then we're working with them and their teams to not only figure out what the future state looks like, but also working with them to help us make decisions on how to build it out within their work management tool, how to document those processes. And we're teaching them as we go, right? We don't want there to be a case where we've done the work behind the scenes, said, here you go, and now we're off to work with somebody else. We really want to empower them because adoption is one of our biggest metrics as to did this work or not, right? And then we'll often work with them to understand how they can train their teams now and in the future, right? If anyone does come on, and then what intervals they need to be reviewing their processes, updating their documentation as well. And one of the biggest things is, where is this information living? Because one of the biggest problems is that we have the work happening in one place. Let's say it's a work management tool. You have your Asanas and your Rikes and Mondays, and then you have the documentation floating around in Google Docs or some other tool like Confluence, let's say, right? And the documentation and the processes around how we work is separate from where the work is actually happening. So one of the things that we'll do is work to integrate the tools, the templates that are being used day to day, and the processes with the documentation so they all live in the same place. And so as things change and update over time, and we're training them on how to make those changes, they know exactly where to look because they're all aligned and all in one place.
Yeah, so I'll put some real world experience behind this. I'm a big process guy, and I tell all of our listeners that if you want to get past the $3 million market, depending on your industry, you can't do that with haphazard word of mouth. This is how we do things. It has to be formalized into a process. Now, the first thing I learned is that no one likes the word process.
Right.
So, I use the word best practice. And when I changed that vernacular a long time ago, my employees really loved the idea. They're like, oh, we have best practices, right? This is like, and honestly, when you're small, this is like best practices is good for the owner because typically he or she will be like, this is the way I would do it if I was in your shoes. And that's what owners like that, right? So best practices was the name of our process folder that we had for every thing. So we had best practices for hiring nurses, which was one of my business, for interview. It was best practice for interviews. That was one thing. The second thing that we did is if there was a breakdown where we made a mistake, the first thing I would do, or my second in command would do, is let's go back to the best practice. What does the best practice say? Did we skip a step? Was this done? So we review that. So we are always going back to best practices. And then the third thing we would do is we would update best practices on a yearly basis with the team so that we would review it and say, what has changed? Is there a streamline that effect that we've had now? Have we added more to the best practice? And then the last thing I would just give you some real world experiences. I totally love software that's built for your industry because it's built in processes. Yeah. And one of the things I've learned is when you're buying software and you're going from other software that you've had, don't adapt to the way that they do the software, not the way you wish it would be done because it was done in the past a certain way. We did that. We moved from Microsoft CRM Dynamics, I don't know what it's called anymore, to a software product called Velocify. And, when we moved, it was considerably different. And Velocify was specifically made for our industry. And when we adopted what they had been doing, it made complete difference in our business. I mean, we doubled in our sales within 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah. Because of the productivity improvement. Yeah.
That's so good. And like to your earlier point, like best practices, I love that you framed it that way. Right? Because that's what it is. Like we have specific segments that we train on best practices and standards, but we're really just communicating what the documentation says.
Yeah. And it made people willing to go back at it. Processes seems autocratic, whereas best practice seems this is how people do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I love what you said about the software as well, because one of the things that I'll often say is just because it's the way you've always done something, it doesn't mean it's the right way, right? We're supposed to flex the software. We're supposed to integrate it with other tools. We're supposed to, break open the mold so that it works for us. But absolutely agree with what you're saying.
And I was guilty of that a lot. I'd be like, "Oh, how come the software doesn't work this way?
Right.
I'm so used to it this way." And then they would, painstakingly, I would then do it the way that the new software was, and then eventually I'd be like, "Oh, these guys really know what they're doing."
Right.
They really know what they're doing. If you bought the right software, it really makes a big difference. I mean, the difference with Microsoft Dynamics is it's 100% customizable. Whereas when we went to this Velocify, it was, specifically for our industry. So the processes and best practices were all right in it. And, you didn't have you didn't have any freedom, which is, I thought, that's not a good thing, but believe me, it was because they knew what they were doing. They had been doing it for 20 years. They knew the way our industry worked. So, what about when you're moving? So, when you're moving clients have you been brought on board to help someone select software?
Yes, we have. Yeah.
What's that like?
It's interesting because we are mostly software agnostic. We tend to stick with Asana as a work management tool. Oftentimes we're brought in for a CRM selection though, and that's where we'll kind of look at our partners and see what's available. So if it's HubSpot, versus Salesforce, we'll be looking at different options for them. In some cases, we've explored Rike or ClickUp. That was the right tool for that person. We do have partners that we'll work with in those cases. We'll typically bring them in to do a demo for another work management tool. What that will look like is really lining up what their requirements are. So we do a bit of discovery off the hop to understand what do you want the tool to do. We meet with the different stakeholders of the teams or departments, and we say what's not working, right? Well, what is happening right now in the day-to-day? What do you want to happen? And then we just line it up against the different tools. So if it's not a capability we have in-house, then we'll bring in a partner to source and do a demo for us, and then we work with them on the implementation and the documentation. But we really do want to make it so that the customer has the final say in what the tool looks like. they're often looking for recommendations, and they'll trust us because we've done these implementations before. But it's really just lining it up and checking off boxes. So we'll actually create a matrix based on their requirements of this tool has reporting baked in. This one has time tracking and detailed reporting native to the tool, whereas we'd have to integrate through a third party or tap into the API to get what you're looking for here. And so we're often considering those things. And with those additional features, often comes, increased costs as well. And so being budget conscious is obviously a part of the process. And if they have a very defined budget, then we want to make sure that we're providing a solution that fits within that as well. But like I said earlier, with the process improvement documentation, they're always involved in the decision making, and we kind of walk through that with them.
Yeah. Yeah. I also remember too, I kind of forgot one of the one of the key reasons why we created best practices too was when I was going from my second to my third company, I didn't like the employees I worked with, I'd hired at my second company. I made a major commitment to hire better people, have our culture predetermined before we hired people, so we knew what we were looking for, and be able to give our people the best tools so that they could be successful. And the best practices that we did was there so that when people were hired, they could hit the ground running super fast, and they knew exactly what was expected of them. And so I just remember now how that, the difference between the second company and the third company I had, and how much I just loved the people who worked for me at my third company, was because, we were more organized. And so I wanted to ask you this question. Have you been brought on because a company was being acquired and they had no processes and procedures in place, and they came to you and they said, we're being acquired, and this company, they want processes and we don't have it. Has that happened?
Yes, I've been brought in, prior to the acquisition and post acquisition, or a merger in most cases. And so the merger is really the most interesting one, because you have these two teams that have been operating, very differently for years, and now we're trying to bring them together. In the case of the company that is, in discussions around acquisition, it's really very interesting because we meet and I hear things like, yeah, we've got documentation. Here it is. And we open up, Google Drive or Box or SharePoint, and we look at some documentation. And, it's typically the head of ops or a senior manager walking us through that. And there are their team members on the call who say things like, I've never seen that before.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
When do we use that? And then, they backtrack a little bit. And so, yeah, it's like we think we are good at documentation as business leaders, because maybe we've done it once, we've gone through an exercise with a consultant, or we've attempted it internally. But then, to your earlier point, it's like, is anyone looking at them? Is anyone using them? And so we really have to really start from scratch there. When is this happening? What stage are you at in your conversations? How do things operate right now? And then even how they operate right now isn't really isn't the most optimized version of how it could be. And so we're then looking at the current state and still going through the same process to get them to a more optimized solution, creating documentation around that to then hand over. And so, yeah, it's really interesting on both sides of it to see what the current state really looks like, and what, the impressions are of that leadership team on where their documentation stands.
Yeah, I think that I love a company that's well run. I just do.
Yeah.
And where you're executing like incredibly well. And there's only been a few times that I've seen some businesses be really great at execution, and they all were really anal about process-driven businesses.
Yeah.
And let me tell you something. Those businesses, number one, they killed it as far as growth goes. Number two is they got acquired and the owner came in and they got a higher multiple of what people paid for their company for because they were so
Yeah.
well organized.
Mm-hmm.
So, that's why I say to you, if you want to be a professional entrepreneur and really have a good business, you got to have great processes and procedures, because let me tell you, the best companies in the world, they don't wing it.
It's
They
true.
they just don't. They
Yep.
have they just know that they have to have these best practices in place, and it's not sexy to do it, but that's why it's sometimes easier if you don't have the business owner doing it. If you have an operations person and that is their responsibility, and then the entrepreneur holds the operations person, second in command, responsible for this. They say
And
the second in command's job is execution.
yeah,
Your job is to execute my business plan and make sure everything is being done. And the type of person who's really good at that is someone who's really, really anal or ADHD about it.
right.
And in those cases, you need those best practice documents to kind of do that. Have you seen that? Let me ask you this. That was a theory of mine, that the
Sure.
operations person needs to be anal about it. When you have been involved with companies that are really well run, is there somebody like that operations person that you've seen be really on top of the documents?
The simple answer is no,
Mm.
Stephen. If I can be honest, there's often operators who are in their roles who are not great at documentation or keeping up with it because they're so in the day to day that they are constantly putting out fires. They're trying to
Yep.
keep up. They have issues, as long as the Nile River, right?
Yep.
And they cannot keep up with their improvements. And something you said earlier about building a strong business. I really feel that if you are good at process and have an organization that is, like you said, process driven, it really comes down to the leaders, like their vision for the company. This could be the visionary or the operator in many cases. And so we run our business on the EOS framework. And so like we start top down, like our core values are iterative mindset, personal resiliency, ownership, and then validate everything, right? And so we really start down. And so to have a company that is well run, well organized, where the leadership understands the need for process, and then that trickles down to the team and the individual contributors that are then, ingrained in this culture around process, is by having this clear vision, having those core values that you can link to people, that you can assess people on and make sure that they're not only aligned, but they're following them and consistent. And so when it comes to how are we doing, are our processes, aligned with the vision? Are they aligned with the goals? Are we moving in the same direction? I really think it starts top down, right? And that often comes from the leadership.
Yeah, I think that to me, you want to. I really believe in high probability of success, and so you want to be doing these things that allows your company to really reduce the error, the potential for mistakes.
Mhm.
What I mean by that is, it definitely starts off with vision, understanding culture, understanding
Mhm.
where you're headed, understanding what your goals are. It definitely starts with that. But that's where companies that are getting over $10 million, you have to have that. Okay. But if you want to get over $10 million, or you want to get to $10 million mark, you got to have the processes down too.
Agreed.
So it's, if you don't have, if one of those is two of those things is missing, and you're not great at those two things, your probability of success is going to go down. I'm not saying you're not going to be successful. What I
Mhm.
am saying is that your probability goes way up if you do both of those things really well. And I think that's the key. You want, you know, uh, so
I absolutely agree.
and I think I think my companies have done well in those two areas, really. We, I think, and then this is the other part. Nobody is out there without competition, right? So you're competing every single day. Um, so are you going to beat your competition based on
Mm,
your vision,
right.
based on your goals? Uh, Maybe, but
I hope so.
it's more than likely it's going to be on the execution side that you're going to beat your competition on.
Yeah. Let me finish answering your question there. So like these operators in these roles, right? They often like it's not that they're not good at process, it's just that they haven't had the buy-in from the rest of the leadership team because again, it does start there. Like they're one person who understands the need for it, wants to implement it, but they haven't got the buy-in or the support from anyone else on their team, and it's like they're playing a losing battle. Fighting a losing battle, forgive me. And so when I'm coming in, they're really looking for a partner, right, to help them to be a voice of reason,
The
right?
operations person is, or
The, the,
the
the
yeah,
operations person.
yeah,
They're really looking for a partner to come in, be the voice of reason, and help to communicate what they've been trying to instill for years,
yeah.
right, on their own. So I would say that's where we're coming in a lot of the times is to provide that support and be that outside party that says, hey, this is broken, let's fix it.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. So it's been a while. The companies that I have right now, they do not have a lot of employees, so I don't have to have, which is on purpose.
Mm,
So I don't have to have a second in command, right?
sure.
Now, if I were to have a second in command, um, what I would what I would say to them, and this is the vision of the company, which we've all put, maybe we would all agree on it.
Yeah.
Certainly, we would. A vision, culture, mission, goals. Okay, now I want my second in command. I want you to be anal about us having documented best practices and what we're following them on a consistent basis. And I would hold him or her accountable to, I might even have a monthly meeting saying, all right, how are we doing with our business processes? Okay. Is there any updates? Like it would be like, I would really be on top of those things. Does, do you think that that is the right way to go? Because you're saying to me that it's because the higher ups don't believe in what the operations person does. They really don't care. They're like, here, you have
Right.
a job to do, go do it.
Hmm.
Right? Is that what you're saying?
Um, yes and no. I think that it is the responsibility of this operator, the second in command, if they've been put in that place to manage and oversee these processes. They are responsible and they are accountable as well for this. Yes, they should absolutely have to answer. I firmly believe, though, that it is the responsibility of everyone to manage processes and make sure that we are up to date and we are doing well,
Mm.
right? If we go back to culture, it's a culture in my company that if we are doing something, changing something, we iterate all the time. Then we document what that change is, and then we communicate that change, right? In our inside of our Asana, where our standards and best practices live, right? Everyone has the ability to create SOPs and they know how to link them back to either a core business process or a piece of technology that we're using or a company policy. I think it's everyone's responsibility to take ownership over their department, their team, their specific function within the company. And then, yes, report to the operator second in command, but you can't leave it to one person. It shouldn't be on one person's shoulders. You should create a culture where everyone is involved and we live, eat, and breathe this stuff.
Yeah. So I'm thinking back to, how I could really articulate this better and why I feel the way I feel.
Okay.
And I'll give you an example. So I played a lot of sports and I reached, um, a very, very high level college Division I sport. I played baseball. I played four other sports too, but baseball was my thing I did. I had an amazing high school coach, and I had a really good um, college coach too. Actually, my high school coach was better than my college coach, but my high school coach. So in baseball, let me ask you this, Marquis. What do you think in baseball is, if you're a coach, the things that you would focus in on? Just the most obvious things.
Um, Training, right?
Okay.
Skill training.
All right. So skill training. So it would be
Sure.
hitting the baseball,
Yeah.
throwing the baseball, and running, right?
Right.
Everybody
Yeah.
would focus on those things, right?
Right.
So if you just focused on those things, you think you would have a great team, right?
Right. Mm.
Well, what my high school coach and my college coach did is you would constantly go through real situations over and over and over again, so that when it happened in the game, you weren't caught by surprise. So what do I mean by
Yeah.
that? Okay. I understand that maybe many of us are not sports people, but when the pitcher has the ball and there's a guy on first base, one of the plays that you can do is the guy on first base can start running towards second base.
Stealing.
No, this is when the pitcher still has the ball.
Okay.
Right? Yes. But what happens is, if there's if there's a guy on third base and the guy does it on first base while the pitcher still has the ball, the idea is to get the pitcher to be so nervous about what to do that the pitcher either, it's called balk, which means he makes a mistake on the mound. 2, he throws the ball to the wrong person. And it's so distracting that the guy from third base can score. The ball's never been hit.
Right.
Okay. This is all going on during the game. And for those who don't know baseball really well, this type of stuff under the professional level happens all the time. So we would constantly practice this one example of what happens when the guy in first base starts taking off and you have a guy in third base. What do? You have to step off the mound. You have to throw it. You have to run toward the guy. You have to be careful of what's going on in third base. Then you got to throw the ball to the second baseman, and then he runs the other guy back. It's not hitting. It's not pitching. It's really not running. And we would go through all those scenarios of what would happen during the game. What happens when the ball's hitting center field over the center fielder's head? What's the relay? You would practice all these game time situations. Do you do that in business?
The short answer is no.
No. What happens
we should.
Right.
And
what happens
we
when
know how?
Right. What happens when a client calls in with a complaint? What's the process? What's the best practice for that?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. What happens when someone has a defect and it's this particular, that's an easy one, but to me, I learned all this stuff of incredible. Now, by the way, my high school baseball team was number 1 in the state. And my college team was one of the top 40 teams in the country. So there's a correlation between being really good at what you do, and your ability to execute. And that's where I think business processes. That's why I'm a big proponent of it. I should come work for you.
That's so good. Let's do something.
Yeah.
Let's do something. If I can respond to that,
please.
I mean, yes, in business, we don't do that, right? We don't run those scenarios. In EOS, they call it IDS, right? Identify, discuss, solve. And so a customer comes to you with a complaint. You've now identified, if you're the leader that wants to receive that feedback and improve it, you've identified a problem, an issue in your business, and you can add it to a list, right? So a customer gives you feedback, then you take that into a leadership meeting and you discuss what happened, where the breakdown was, why this happened, who did it, was it a breakdown in software technology, was it a process problem, was it a handoff issue, was it miscommunication? So we're discussing it, we're running all these different scenarios, right? And thinking about what went wrong. And then we move to the S, which is the solve, right? So then that's when we start, testing different options. And if it's a solution fix, we go and look at other software solutions. If it's an update to a process or a training need, and then we start running all these scenarios back to figure out what is the ideal resolution for this, right? So again, to answer your question, no, we don't do it. But there's a way that we should be approaching this so that we can think about the different outcomes and implement the most ideal one.
Well, we're going to leave it off at that. With that, it was a very unusual and a good podcast. It's certainly hits home what I really believe in. I'd like to thank so very much Marquise Murray from his company for coming on to today's podcast. And if you like today's podcast, please feel free to share it with a friend and also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app so you can see future episodes. And please also, if you have really liked today's podcast or any of the other ones, please give us a 5-star review. It helps us get the word out. And if you're looking for a line of credit for your business, you can reach us at fscreditline.com. That's fscreditline.com. FS is in Financing Solutions, creditline.com. Marquise, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
They can visit marquismurray.com. Take a look at services. There's blogs and there's a link to a YouTube channel with instructional videos. But yeah, marquismurray.com has everything you need.
Yep, and that's spelled MARQUIS and then Murray.
That's right.
Great. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, Stephen.
So today, what I learned is I think the thing which my you're going to think this is unusual, but I had a hunch that companies that were being bought would be working closely with Marquis to get their processes up to date. It's kind of important. And I think that says a lot to you. If your goal is to eventually sell your company, which it better be, you better not thinking you're going to do this till you're 90 years old. At some point, you're going to sell that baby. You better start getting used to having processes in place. And we can't beat it up any more than I've already said about execution. So please consider that. All right, everybody, have a great day. It was great talking to Marquis, and I learned a lot. Have a good day, everybody.